The silence of the Upper East Side penthouse was the first thing that hit James Braden. Not the peaceful quiet he sometimes craved, but a dead, sterile vacuum. Elsie was gone. Her shoes were gone. Her coat was gone. But everything else was pristine, as if staged for a magazine shoot. His gaze fell to the center of their king-sized bed. Lying on the perfectly smooth duvet was a single, leather-bound journal. A chill, entirely separate from the autumn air outside, snaked up his spine. He picked it up, his thumb tracing her initials, EMB. His first thought wasn't fear. It was irritation. More drama. James Braden, a man who built an empire on calculated risks and gut feelings, felt neither in that moment. Only a profound and infuriating emptiness. He strode through the sprawling apartment, the floor-to-ceiling windows displaying a panoramic, indifferent New York City skyline. Every room was a testament to his success and her taste, a sterile fusion of minimalist design and Elsie's desperate attempts to inject warmth with fresh flowers and scented candles. Today, the flowers were gone. The air smelled of nothing. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over her contact. Elsie. He pressed it. It went straight to voicemail, the same cheerful, slightly breathless message she'd recorded months ago. Hi, you've reached Elsie. Leave a message, and I'll get right back to you. Have a beautiful day. Elsie, stop this nonsense, he said into the phone, his voice clipped and cold. Whatever point you think you're making, you've made it. Call me. He hung up, tossing the phone onto a marble countertop with a sharp clatter. Pregnant. She was 7 months pregnant with their first child, a daughter. And she chose now to pull a stunt like this? For weeks, she had been fragile. That was the word his mind settled on. Crying over nothing, claiming she heard noises at night, convinced someone was moving her things. He'd suggested therapy, a vacation, more rest. He'd done everything a good husband was supposed to do. He'd even hired a private nurse to check in on her, though Elsie had resisted, saying it made her feel like a prisoner. His phone buzzed. It was Isabella Vance, his head of acquisitions, and for the past 6 months, the woman who offered him a sanctuary from the escalating emotional chaos at home. Everything all right, James? Her voice was like smooth, aged whiskey, calm, potent, and predictable. Elsie's gone, he said, rubbing his temples. She packed a bag and just left. A perfectly timed pause. Oh, James, I'm so sorry. After how worried you've been about her mental state. Do you think she's a danger to herself? To the baby? The question landed with surgical precision, validating every dismissive thought he'd had. I don't know. I think she's being theatrical. She left her journal on the bed. It's practically a cliché. Maybe you should read it, Isabella suggested gently. It might tell you where she went, or at least what's going through her mind. Be careful, though. A mind in that state can be unreliable. Call me if you need anything. Anything at all. He disconnected and stared at the journal in his hand. Elsie's mind. It felt like a foreign country he had no desire to visit. With a sigh of weary obligation, he poured himself a scotch, sank into a leather armchair that cost more than most cars, and opened the first page. The entry was dated 3 months ago. Her familiar, elegant script filled the page. July 14th. James thinks I'm losing my mind. I can see it in his eyes. That little flicker of pity, quickly masked by impatience. It started with small things. My keys not being where I left them. The thermostat turned down so low the apartment feels like a morgue. He says it's pregnancy brain, a condescending, catch-all excuse for his refusal to listen. But it's more than that. I feel like a ghost in my own home. I walk into a room and the scent of a perfume I don't wear lingers in the air. A faint, cloying gardenia scent. When I mentioned it, he just laughed. Elsie, this place is bigger than our first 3 apartments combined. It's probably just the air vents. But I know what I smell, James snorted, taking a gulp of scotch. Gardenias. Of course, it was probably a new cleaner the maid was using. He flipped a few pages, the entries blurring into a litany of perceived slights and imagined anxieties. July 28th. I'm not crazy. I swear I'm not. I had a prenatal appointment with Dr. Miller today. James was supposed to come, but a last-minute merger crisis came up. It always does. Dr. Miller said my blood pressure was a little high. He told me to avoid stress. I wanted to laugh in his face. Stress is the air I breathe in this glass cage. Afterward, I came home, and the spare key, the one we keep in the ceramic pot on the patio, was on the kitchen counter. I never touched that key. James swears he didn't move it. I feel like someone is playing with me. A cruel little game to see how long it takes for me to break. He slammed the journal shut. This was pointless. It was a road map of a crumbling mind, a detailed account of her descent into paranoia. He felt a surge of anger, not at the person who might be tormenting her, but at Elsie herself, for being so weak, for letting these fantasies consume her. He was building an empire, and she was wilting under the pressure of having everything. Then his phone rang again. The caller ID read Sarah, Elsie's older sister. He braced himself and answered. James, where is she? Sarah's voice was stripped of all pleasantries. If I knew that, I wouldn't be answering the phone, would I? Don't you dare use that tone with me, she snapped. She called me yesterday. She was terrified. She said you were dismissing everything she said, that you were making her feel crazy. Did you even listen to her? Did you once, for a single second, stop thinking about yourself and consider that my pregnant sister might actually be in trouble? Oh, please, James retorted, his patience gone. She was talking about misplaced keys and phantom perfume, Sarah. She needed help, and I tried to get it for her. This is what she does instead. She runs, because it's easier than facing reality. The only reality she was facing was a husband who stopped seeing her as a person and started seeing her as a liability. Sarah shot back. You find her, James, or I swear to God, you'll have more to worry about than a PR scandal. The line went dead. James stood in the echoing silence, the weight of Sarah's words and the leather-bound journal pressing in on him. He didn't believe a word of it. Elsie was the one who had left. She was the one who was unstable. He was the victim here, the long-suffering husband. And this journal, he decided, would be his proof. For the next 2 days, James operated on a fuel of caffeine and indignation. He hired a private investigator, a discreet man named Peterson, more to cover his bases than out of genuine concern. He gave him Elsie's photo, her credit card numbers, and a brief, sanitized version of the situation. His pregnant, emotionally distressed wife had left and needed to be found for her own safety. He spent his days at Braden Capital, a monolith of steel and glass in Midtown, immersing himself in the familiar comfort of numbers and strategy. Here, he was in control. Here, emotions were a weakness to be exploited in others. Never indulged in himself. Isabella was a ghost at his side, a silent partner in his narrative. She'd bring him coffee, touch his shoulder with a gesture of perfectly calibrated sympathy, and murmur things like, "Any news? I'm so worried." Or, "You're handling this with so much strength, James." At night, the penthouse felt cavernous. He'd pour a drink and, against his better judgment, open the journal. It was like picking at a scab. Each entry was a fresh wave of what he saw as delusion, each one hardening his conviction that he was on the right side of this. August 12th. I think I'm being followed. It sounds insane, I know. But it's the same car, a dark grey sedan. I see it when I go to the market, when I walk in the park. It's always just, there, I told James. He pulled up the building's security footage on his phone and scrolled through it with a bored expression. Elsie, there are 1,000 grey sedans in Manhattan. You're noticing them because you're looking for them. It's called confirmation bias. He said it like he was teaching a child. I felt my face get hot with shame. Maybe he's right. Maybe I am just making it all up. James remembered that conversation. He'd felt a flash of pity for her then, this woman whose world had shrunk to the point where a common car felt like a predator. He'd tried to be gentle, but his patience had worn thin. He flipped further into the journal, the entries growing more frantic. August 25th. My prenatal vitamins were different today. The pills were a slightly different shade, a bit chalkier. I know it sounds like nothing. I have a whole new bottle, so I took one from there instead. I threw the other ones away. But I can't shake the feeling. It's like the ground is constantly shifting beneath my feet. I have no one to tell. If I tell James, he'll just add it to his list of Elsie's episodes. If I tell Sarah, she'll insist on coming here, and that will just start a war with James. I am so utterly alone. A knot of something unfamiliar tightened in his chest. Annoyance? Guilt? He couldn't be sure. He remembered her mentioning the vitamins. He'd told her she was being ridiculous, that variations between batches were normal. He'd even called the pharmacy to prove it, and they'd confirmed it was possible. He'd felt so vindicated, so rational. Seeing it written in her hand, feeling the desperation seeping through the ink, was different. It was unsettling. His reading was interrupted by a call from Peterson, the PI. Mr. Braden, I have an update. Find her? Not yet. But her credit card was just used an hour ago. A gas station off Route 17, heading north into the Catskills. And there was a charge yesterday at a small pharmacy in Liberty, New York, for prenatal vitamins and a burner phone. A burner phone. The words landed like stones. This wasn't an impulsive flight. This was planned. She was actively trying not to be found. She's hiding from me, James said, the realization dawning on him. It appears that way, sir, Peterson said, his voice neutral. What's interesting is the other activity on her accounts, or lack thereof. She hasn't touched the joint checking account or her personal savings. The card she's using is a low-limit emergency card you set up for her years ago. She's running on fumes. This didn't fit the narrative. If she was having a breakdown, wouldn't she be spending erratically? Maxing out cards on lavish hotel rooms or spa treatments? This was calculated. Frugal. This was survival. After the call, James walked to the medicine cabinet in their vast, marble-clad bathroom. He saw the new bottle of prenatal vitamins Elsie had bought, sitting next to his shaving cream. On a whim, he opened the trash can beneath the sink. Buried under some tissues, he found the old bottle she'd thrown out. He twisted the cap off. There were a few pills left. He shook one into his palm. It looked identical to the ones in the new bottle. He felt a wave of relief, a justification. See? She was imagining things. He was about to throw it back when he noticed something. A faint, almost imperceptible score mark around the gelatin capsule, as if it had been professionally opened and resealed. He held it up to the light. It was nothing. A manufacturing defect. It had to be. He closed his fist around the tiny pill, the smooth coating suddenly feeling sinister. He went back to the journal, a new, urgent curiosity gnawing at him. He read through entries detailing her growing lethargy, her brain fog, her sudden dizzy spells. All things he and her doctor had attributed to a difficult pregnancy. September 10th. I almost fainted today. getting out of the shower. My heart was pounding, and the room was spinning. James was already at work. I called Isabella to ask her to cancel a floral arrangement I'd ordered for a dinner party, and her voice was so strange, so solicitous. "Elsie, you poor thing. You must be terrified. James is so worried. He thinks the stress is getting to you. Please, just rest. Let me handle everything." It felt less like concern and more like a command, like she was enjoying this, like she was waiting for me to fall apart. James's blood ran cold. He had told Isabella about Elsie's dizzy spells, confiding in her during a late-night rendezvous at her apartment. He had painted a picture of his wife as a fragile, crumbling woman. Isabella had listened, her eyes full of sympathy, holding his hand and telling him he was a saint for dealing with it all. He read Elsie's entry again, like she was waiting for me to fall apart. He'd laughed at Elsie's suspicions about Isabella. He'd called it jealousy, insecurity. He'd assured her that Isabella was just a colleague, a friend. A lie. A clean, simple lie he told himself was necessary to keep the peace. But reading Elsie's words, he saw the lie for what it was. A betrayal that had left his wife utterly isolated, with no one to trust, not even her own instincts. The journal was no longer just proof of Elsie's instability. It was becoming an indictment of his own. The next morning, James took the vitamin capsule to a private lab, using a discreet contact from one of his pharmaceutical ventures. He told them it was a competitor's product he wanted analyzed. The lie came easily. A well-oiled mechanism. As he handed over the sample, he felt a tremor in his hand he couldn't control. He spent the day in a fugue state, the normally crisp lines of spreadsheets blurring before his eyes. Every interaction felt muffled, distant. He saw Isabella in a board meeting, presenting Q3 projections with her usual unflappable confidence. He watched her, really watched her, for the first time in months. He saw the way she commanded the room, the subtle deference the other executives paid her. She was brilliant, ambitious, and utterly composed. Was it possible that beneath that polished exterior was the monster Elsie described? The thought seemed preposterous. Elsie was emotional, intuitive. Isabella was logical, analytical. He had always seen them as polar opposites, and he had craved Isabella's stability. But what if Elsie's intuition wasn't a symptom of her condition, but a survival instinct? That evening he met Isabella for dinner at a quiet, obscenely expensive restaurant in the West Village. He needed to see her reaction, to test the waters. "You seem distracted," she said, placing her hand over his on the table. Her skin was cool, her nails perfectly manicured. "Just thinking about Elsie," he said, pulling his hand away to pick up his wine glass. "The PI tracked her to the Catskills. She's hiding. It's more deliberate than I thought." Isabella's face softened into a mask of concern. "Oh, James, that must be so difficult. To feel like you're the enemy." She wrote in her journal that she thought she was being followed, that someone was tampering with her things, even her vitamins. He watched her face intently. Not a flicker, not a single tell. "Poor thing," she murmured, shaking her head sadly. The mind is a powerful thing. It can create whole realities to protect itself from a truth it can't handle. Maybe the pregnancy, the pressure of your life. It was all just too much for her. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Honestly, James, this might be for the best, for the baby. If she's this paranoid, she could be a danger. Once you find her, we need to get her into proper care." Immediately. Every word she spoke was a perfect echo of his own thoughts from a few days ago. He had fed her the narrative of the crazy wife, and now she was feeding it back to him, seasoned with her own brand of venomous pity. It was a flawless performance, and it made his skin crawl. He changed the subject, talking about work, about a new acquisition deal. He let her believe everything was normal. But as he looked at her across the table, all he could see was Elsie's handwriting, the desperate loops and slants of a woman screaming into a void. He went home and picked up the journal again, flipping to the later entries. They were shorter, the handwriting more jagged. September 20th. I know I'm not imagining the gardenia scent. It was on the lapel of James's suit jacket tonight. I hugged him when he came home, and it was there, faint but unmistakable. I asked him about it, and he said he had a meeting with a new female client. He got so defensive. His whole body went rigid. He is lying. It's not just a feeling anymore. It's a fact, and the fact is terrifying. James flinched, the memory hitting him with physical force. He'd been with Isabella that afternoon. She wore a gardenia-scented perfume. It was her signature. He remembered the conversation, his own sharp, guilty denial. He had made Elsie feel worthless for noticing the truth. He kept reading, his heart pounding against his ribs. September 28th. Something happened today that finally made everything clear. I went to that little French cafe on Lexington, the one I love, for a pastry. I was sitting in a corner booth when Isabella walked in. She didn't see me. She was with a man I've never seen before. He was slick, nervous-looking. They sat a few tables away. I couldn't hear everything, but I heard a few words clearly. He mentioned a name, Dr. Alistair Finch, and she said something that made no sense. She said, "The Prentice Holdings transfer will be complete once the asset is neutralized." Then she handed him a thick envelope. James's blood turned to ice. Prentice Holdings. Prentice Holdings was a shell corporation he'd set up years ago. It was a ghost entity, used for his most sensitive off-the-books transactions. Only 3 people in the world knew it even existed. Him, his personal lawyer, and his chief financial officer. Isabella Vance was not one of them. The journal entry continued. I don't know what it means. Prentice Holdings. Asset neutralized. It sounds like something from a spy movie. But it was the look on her face. It was cold, predatory. This isn't just about an affair. It's something else. Something dangerous. I can't stay here. I can't protect my baby here. He won't believe me. He'll believe her. I have to go. I'll leave this journal. It's the only proof I have. Maybe one day he'll read it. Maybe one day he'll see. He dropped the journal as if it had burned him. Prentice Holdings. Asset neutralized. The words replayed in his mind, a death knell to his denial. This wasn't about paranoia. This wasn't about hormones or a fragile mental state. This was a conspiracy, and his wife, the woman he had called crazy, had been the only one sane enough to see it. The weight of his failure, his willful blindness, crashed down on him with the force of a physical blow. He had not just ignored her. He had actively participated in her torment. He had been the primary tool of his mistress's gaslighting. The thought was so vile, so monstrous, he felt a wave of nausea roll through him. He staggered to the bathroom and retched, his body expelling the scotch and the lies he had so easily swallowed. When he was done, he looked at his reflection in the mirror. The face staring back was a stranger's, a fool, a monster, a man who had betrayed everything that mattered. Elsie wasn't the one who was crazy. He was. The lab results came back the next morning. James read the email on his phone, standing in the middle of his silent living room as the sun streamed in, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Each word was a nail in the coffin of his old reality. The capsule Elsie had suspected contained not only her prenatal vitamin, but also a significant dose of a benzodiazepine derivative, crushed and mixed with the powdered contents, a drug known to cause drowsiness, confusion, memory loss, and dizziness. In sustained doses, it could mimic the symptoms of severe anxiety and paranoia. It was also known to be dangerous during pregnancy. The email ended with a clinical, chilling sentence. Prolonged, unmonitored use could pose a significant risk to both maternal and fetal health. He had been poisoning his own child, unknowingly, but his ignorance was no excuse. He had been a willing accomplice. His dismissals, his accusations of her being dramatic, had provided the perfect cover for Isabella's methodical campaign. The rage that followed was cold and diamond-hard. It wasn't the hot, impulsive anger he was used to. This was a calculating fury. He now had two missions: find Elsie and make Isabella pay. He started with the name from the journal, Dr. Alistair Finch. He called his head of security, Frank, a former NYPD detective with a face like a road map of bad neighborhoods and an unshakable loyalty that James had purchased long ago. Frank, I need you to find someone for me. Dr. Alistair Finch. And I need everything you can get on him. Yesterday. On it, boss. Next, Prentice Holdings. He drove to his personal lawyer's office, a dusty, book-lined suite in a pre-war building that felt a world away from the chrome and glass sleekness of Braden Capital. David, I need to see the transaction logs for Prentice Holdings. For the last 6 months, David, a man in his late 60s with weary eyes, looked at him over his spectacles. James, that's your black box. You've always said you wanted absolute deniability. My circumstances have changed, James said, his voice flat. I need to see what's been moving in and out of it. It took an hour of agonizing waiting while David's paralegal pulled the encrypted files. When the logs were finally printed and spread across the mahogany desk, the truth was stark and undeniable. Over the past 4 months, a series of structured 7-figure payments had been flowing out of Prentice Holdings to another shell corporation, this one based in the Cayman Islands, a company James had never heard of, Vance Markham Equity, Vance Isabella's last name. Who the hell is Markham? James asked, his voice a low growl. David did some digging. The name came back in 10 minutes. Arthur Markham, a disgraced competitor, a hedge fund manager James had driven into bankruptcy 5 years ago, a man who held a notorious grudge against him. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying speed. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't just a jealous woman trying to get rid of a wife. This was a corporate takeover, a hostile one, executed from the inside. Isabella was using his own Black Ops fund to pay his enemy. They were systematically bleeding him dry, and the asset neutralization, Elsie, was likely a crucial part of the plan. If Elsie were to be declared mentally incompetent, or if something were to happen to her and the baby, his legal heir, James would be emotionally compromised, distracted. The perfect time for a boardroom coup, backed by Markham's proxy votes and Isabella's insider knowledge. Frank called while James was still staring at the papers, his world collapsing in on itself. Got your doctor, boss, Frank said. Alistair Finch. Used to be a respected pharmacist, lost his license 2 years ago for selling controlled substances without a prescription. He's been scraping by, doing some shady work for a private clinic. But here's the kicker. His sister was Arthur Markham's executive assistant for 10 years. The web was complete. Isabella didn't just find a random disgraced doctor. She used a connection through her partner in crime. It was all connected. It was all a meticulous, cold-blooded plan. James felt a strange sense of clarity amidst the wreckage of his life. For weeks, he had been living in a fog of arrogance and denial. Elsie had been the one living in reality, a terrifying, predatory reality he had refused to see. He stood up, his mind clear for the first time in months. "Frank," he said into the phone, I want you to pull all the security footage from the garage level of my building for the last 3 months. I also want access to every frame of footage from the lobby of Braden Capital. I want to see every time Isabella Vance met with someone who wasn't an employee. What are we looking for? Betrayal, James said, and hung up. He went back to the penthouse, the journal in his briefcase. He didn't see the expensive art or the panoramic views. He saw the space where Elsie should be. He saw the medicine cabinet where the poison had been stored. He saw the bed where she slept, terrified, next to the man who was supposed to protect her. The guilt was a physical presence, a weight in his chest that made it hard to breathe. But beneath the guilt, the fury was building. Isabella and Markham hadn't just targeted his company. They had targeted his family. They had turned his home into a psychological torture chamber for his pregnant wife. They thought he was a fool. They thought he was blinded by arrogance and lust. They weren't entirely wrong. But they had made one critical, fatal miscalculation. They had underestimated the primal fury of a man who finally realizes he has everything to lose. And they had no idea how ruthless he could be when he had been crossed. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in controlled demolition. James Braden, the corporate raider, turned his predatory instincts inward, dissecting his own life and company with the dispassionate precision he normally reserved for a hostile takeover. Frank worked around the clock, feeding him a steady stream of information that painted a sickeningly clear picture. The security footage was the first piece. Frank isolated every instance of Isabella in the Braden Capital lobby. There, on a Tuesday 6 weeks ago, was footage of her in a hushed, intense conversation with Arthur Markham himself. They thought they were invisible in the river of people flowing through the atrium. But Frank's software isolated them, even reading their lips for key phrases. Board seats. Proxy fight. Braden's heir. Then came the garage footage from his own building. Twice, in the dead of night on weekends, James had been away on business. Alistair Finch's car was seen entering the residence garage using a temporary access code. He would stay for less than 10 minutes each time. 10 minutes was more than enough time to access the apartment using a key Isabella would have provided, swap the vitamins, and leave. James sat in his home office, the evidence laid out on his desk like a battle plan. Financial transfers, photographs, timelines, the lab report. It was an airtight case, not just of corporate espionage, but of conspiracy to commit assault, at the very least. He could go to the police. He would go to the police. But not yet. First, he needed a confession. He needed to look Isabella in the eye and watch her carefully constructed world crumble. It wasn't just about justice. It was about vengeance. It was about clawing back a fraction of the power she had taken from him, the power she had used to terrorize Elsie. He arranged the meeting at the penthouse. He told her it was urgent, that he had news about Elsie. He set the scene with painstaking care. He dimmed the lights, poured 2 glasses of her favorite Chardonnay, and placed them on the coffee table. Between them, he laid Elsie's journal. Closed. When she arrived, she was the picture of concerned sympathy. She wore a cream-colored sheath dress, her dark hair pulled back in an elegant chignon. She walked in and placed a comforting hand on his arm. "James, you look terrible. Did you find her? Is she okay?" "Sit down, Isabella," he said, his voice devoid of all warmth. She sat, her posture perfect, her expression a carefully crafted blend of worry and patience. She was playing her part to the end. "We need to talk," he began, sitting opposite her. "Of course, I'm here for you." "I've been reading Elsie's journal," he said, tapping the leather cover. "It's illuminating. She wrote about you." A flicker of something, was it triumph, crossed her face before being replaced by sadness. "I can imagine. I'm sure she saw me as a threat. It's understandable given her state. Her state, James repeated, the words tasting like ash. Yes, let's talk about her state. The dizziness, the confusion, the paranoia. I had her vitamins tested. He let the sentence hang in the air. For the first time, a crack appeared in her composure. Her back stiffened almost imperceptibly. You what? Why on earth would you do that? Because my wife, the woman I called crazy, was lucid enough to notice a difference. They were laced with a benzodiazepine, Isabella. A potent one. Enough to cause all of her symptoms. Enough to endanger the baby. He watched as the color drained from her face. The police are going to have a lot of questions about that. She recovered quickly, her eyes flashing with indignation. That's a monstrous accusation. You think I had something to do with that? James, she was falling apart. She probably did it to herself for attention. It was a brilliant, vicious pivot. But James was ready. Did she also arrange for Dr. Alistair Finch to make 2 late-night visits to this building to swap out the pills? A pharmacist who lost his license and happens to be the brother of Arthur Markham's former assistant? Isabella's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The name Markham was a direct hit. And did she, in her unstable state, also manage to hack into my most secure private accounts? He continued, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. Did she funnel millions of dollars from Prentice Holdings to a shell company called Vance Markham Equity? He stood up and began to pace, the caged energy of a predator finally unleashed. You see, I thought this was a simple, sordid affair. I thought you were just a mistress who wanted to be a wife. But I underestimated you. This was never about me. It was about my company. It was about revenge for your partner, Markham. Isabella stared at him, her mask of sympathy shattered, revealing the cold, hard ambition beneath. Her eyes narrowed. You were an easy mark, James, she hissed, all pretense gone. So blinded by your own ego, you couldn't see what was right in front of you. You wanted a smart, stable woman who wasn't a mess of emotions? Fine. Here I am. You wanted to believe your wife was crazy? I just gave you the evidence you were already looking for. The casual cruelty of her confession stole his breath. She wasn't just admitting to the plan. She was mocking him for his role in it. You fed me the lines, he said, the realization hitting him. All that talk about her being a danger to the baby. And you ate it up, she sneered. You were so desperate to be right, to be the victim in your own little drama. It was pathetic. Elsie was collateral damage, a means to an end. Once she was out of the picture, either committed or gone. And you were grieving, distracted. The board would have been easy to sway. Markham's shares combined with the ones I've been acquiring through our shell. We would have had a controlling interest within 6 months. She stood up, her composure returning. But this time it was different. It was the arrogance of a player who thought she still held a winning hand. But you have no proof of my involvement with the drugs. It's the word of a disgraced pharmacist against mine. And as for the money, good luck proving I was behind those transfers. It will be your word against mine. Who are they going to believe? The brilliant executive or the cheating husband trying to cover his tracks and frame his mistress? James simply smiled, a cold, grim smile that didn't reach his eyes. You're right, it would be a messy fight. He gestured to a discreetly placed orchid on a side table. Which is why this entire conversation, starting from the moment you walked in that door, has been recorded. Audio and video. He watched the last vestiges of her arrogance evaporate, replaced by a raw, primal panic. Her eyes darted around the room, finally landing on the tiny, nearly invisible lens nestled in the petals of the flower. Her face, for the first time since he'd known her, was a portrait of pure, unadulterated ruin. With Isabella's confession secured, the world shifted into fast forward. James handed the recording and the mountain of evidence to Frank, who delivered it personally to a trusted contact in the district attorney's office. Warrants were issued. By dawn, Isabella Vance and Arthur Markham were in custody. The news of the corporate espionage and conspiracy broke like a thunderclap across the financial world. Braden Capital was in chaos, but James felt none of it. The corporate battle was just noise. The only thing that mattered was finding Elsie. He had the PI's last known location for her, a gas station in the Catskills. But that was days ago. She could be anywhere. He sat in the silent penthouse, the journal open in his lap, feeling a despair so profound it was a physical ache. He had torn down the conspiracy, but he was no closer to fixing the damage he had caused. He had failed her so completely, the chasm between them felt unbridgeable. He forced himself to read the journal again, from the beginning, but this time not as a prosecutor looking for clues, but as a husband trying to find his wife. He searched for the person he had lost, the woman he had stopped seeing. He read about her love for the city's hidden gardens, her fear of thunderstorms, her quiet joy in feeling their baby kick for the first time. He was deep into the early pages, reading an entry about her childhood when he saw it. A passage he'd skimmed over before, dismissing it as irrelevant nostalgia. April 5th, I was talking to Sarah today about Grandma Rose. I miss her so much. I miss those summers she'd take us upstate to her little cabin on Heron Lake. It was our sanctuary. No noise, no expectations. Just the sound of the loons on the water and the smell of pine needles after the rain. She always said, "When the world gets too loud, Elsie girl, you come back to the lake. The water remembers. It will hold you safe." I wish I could go there now. I wish I could just disappear into that quiet and feel safe again. Heron Lake. The words jumped off the page. He'd never heard of it. In all their years together, she had never mentioned it. It was a part of her he had never bothered to know. He scrambled for his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Heron Lake, New York. It was a small, private lake in the heart of the Adirondacks, about a 2-hour drive north from where her credit card was last used. A quick property search under her grandmother's name, Rose Miller, brought up a hit. A small, 2-acre plot with a cabin, deeded to Elsie and Sarah upon her death. He was moving before he even had a conscious thought, grabbing his keys, throwing a bag together. He left a single, brief message for Frank. "I think I know where she is. Handle everything here." The drive north was a torment of hope and fear. What would he say? How could he possibly begin to apologize for a betrayal so deep? "I'm sorry I didn't believe you. I'm sorry I thought you were crazy. I'm sorry I let a monster poison you and our child." The words were hollow, inadequate. After hours of driving, he turned off the main highway onto a series of winding, unpaved roads. The GPS signal died. He was guided only by a hand-drawn map from the county website. Finally, he saw it. A small, weathered sign that read, Heron Lake. He followed a narrow dirt track that ended at a small, rustic cabin nestled amongst towering pine trees. A thin plume of smoke rose from its stone chimney. A beat-up old Subaru, which he recognized as her sister's, was parked beside it. He got out of the car, his heart hammering against his ribs. The air was crisp and clean, smelling of pine and damp earth. It was so quiet. He walked to the door and hesitated, his hand hovering over the wood. This was it. The moment of reckoning. He knocked softly. The door opened, and it was Sarah who stood there, her face a storm of conflicting emotions, anger, relief, and a fierce, protective loyalty. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice low, blocking the doorway. "I know everything, Sarah," he said, his own voice hoarse. "I know what Isabella did. All of it. I need to see her, please." Sarah studied his face, searching for the arrogant, dismissive man she despised. She must have seen something else there, the raw, undisguised desperation of a broken man, because after a long moment, she stepped aside, and there she was. Elsie was sitting in a worn armchair by a crackling fire, a thick quilt draped over her legs. She was thinner, paler, but her eyes, when they met his, were clear and steady. She wasn't the fragile, crumbling woman from his memory. She looked strong, grounded. The baby bump was prominent beneath her sweater. The sight of her, safe and whole, broke something inside him. He took a hesitant step into the room, and the words came out in a ragged whisper. "Elsie." She didn't speak. She just watched him, her expression unreadable. I read the journal," he began, his voice cracking. "I know. About the vitamins, about Prentice Holdings, about everything. Isabella and Markham. They've been arrested. It's over." He expected tears, maybe anger. He got neither. "It's not over," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "They may be gone, but the damage is done, James. Do you have any idea what it feels like to have the one person who is supposed to be your partner, your protector, look at you every day like you're a liability he can't wait to get rid of?" Each word was a perfectly aimed blow. "I was so alone," she continued, a single tear finally tracing a path down her cheek. "Screaming, and there was no sound. I started to believe you. I started to think I really was losing my mind. That's the most evil part of what she did. And you helped her." "I know," he choked out, the admission tearing him apart. "I know, and I will never, ever forgive myself for it. I was a fool, Elsie, a proud, arrogant fool. I stopped listening to you. I stopped seeing you. I failed you. I failed our daughter." He sank to his knees, not in a dramatic gesture, but because his legs could no longer support the weight of his guilt. He looked at her, his eyes pleading. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just came to tell you that you were right. You were right about everything. You were sane, and you were strong, and I was the one who was blind." He reached into his coat and pulled out the lab report, the confession transcript, the financial statements. He laid them on the floor between them. "This is the proof," he said softly. "Not for me. For you. So you know, for the rest of your life, that you were never crazy." Elsie looked from the papers on the floor to the shattered man kneeling before her. Sarah stood silently in the corner, watching, letting her sister have this moment. The fire crackled, filling the silence. For the first time in a long time, the world was quiet. And in that quiet, a new, uncertain chapter was about to begin. The days that followed at the lakeside cabin were a slow, painful lesson in the art of rebuilding from ruins. There was no grand, cinematic moment of forgiveness. Instead, redemption was built in small, quiet increments. James didn't push. He didn't demand. He slept on the lumpy sofa in the main room, waking at dawn to the sound of the loons on the lake. He chopped wood, fixed a leaky faucet, and made coffee, leaving a mug outside Elsie's bedroom door each morning. He was a guest in her sanctuary, and he acted like it. Sarah remained a wary, watchful presence, her arms perpetually crossed, her gaze sharp. She was Elsie's gatekeeper, and James knew he had to earn his way past her. Most of his conversations were with Sarah at first, while Elsie rested. "She's seeing a doctor in town," Sarah told him one afternoon, as they sat on the porch, watching the sunlight dapple on the water. "He says she and the baby are healthy, thank God. but she's anemic, and her stress levels were through the roof. He said a few more weeks of that. He didn't want to finish the sentence. James flinched, the words a physical blow. I know. No, you don't, Sarah said, her voice cutting. You can't. You weren't the one lying awake at night, questioning your own sanity, feeling your body betray you, while the person sleeping next to you sighed with impatience. You have no idea what she went through. You're right, James said quietly. I don't. But I want to understand. I want to spend the rest of my life trying to understand. Slowly, Elsie began to emerge. She would join him on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, and they would sit in silence. The silence was no longer empty and sterile like the penthouse. It was a living thing, filled with unspoken pain, but also a fragile possibility. One evening she finally spoke about it. The worst part, she said, her eyes fixed on the horizon, was the loneliness. Knowing something was deeply wrong, but being told by the person I trusted most that the wrongness was inside me. I took your greatest fear and made it your reality, James admitted, his voice thick with shame. I let my pride and my affair blind me to everything. I wasn't just being a bad husband, I was being a cruel one. There's no excuse. No, she agreed, her voice soft but unyielding. There isn't. He didn't offer excuses. He didn't try to explain away his behavior. He simply owned it. He answered every question she had, no matter how painful. He told her about when the affair with Isabella began, about the lies he'd told, about the things he'd said about her, in moments of confidence with her tormentor. He laid his betrayal bare, offering no defense. It was this brutal honesty, this complete stripping away of his own ego, that began to slowly, painstakingly, rebuild a single thread of trust. He wasn't the same man who had walked into that empty penthouse weeks ago. The crisis had burned away his arrogance, leaving behind a raw, humbled man who was finally seeing the true cost of his actions. His company was in turmoil. The board was demanding his resignation. His lawyers were calling constantly. He ignored most of it. He took one call from Frank. The DA is moving fast, Frank said. They're offering Isabella a deal if she testifies against Markham for a host of other financial crimes. Looks like they'll both be put away for a very long time. Good, James said, feeling a distant, hollow sense of victory. And Frank? Start the process of selling the penthouse, and my shares in Braden Capital, all of them. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Boss, are you sure? I'm sure, James said, looking at Elsie, who was watching him from the doorway. I'm starting over. A week later, on a crisp autumn morning, Elsie went into labor. It was 2 weeks early, but the local doctor said it was normal for a high-stress pregnancy. James drove her to the small community hospital, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. This was the true test, not the confessions or the apologies, but this. The labor was long and difficult. James was by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, murmuring words of encouragement. He was no longer the powerful CEO, but a terrified, hopeful man, completely subservient to the awesome power of what was happening in that room. He saw the strength in Elsie he had been blind to for so long, a deep, resilient power that dwarfed his own. At 3:17 a.m., their daughter was born. She was small but healthy, with a full head of dark hair and a cry that filled the room with life. The nurse laid the baby on Elsie's chest. Elsie looked down at her daughter, her face streaked with tears and sweat, and a look of pure, unadulterated love transformed her features. She looked up at James, her eyes searching his. "What should we name her?" she whispered. James looked at his daughter, his heart overflowing. "Grace," he said, his voice breaking. Let's call her Grace. Elsie nodded, a small, weary smile touching her lips. It was the first real smile she had given him in months. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a beginning. It was Grace. They never went back to the penthouse. James sold his company, extracting a fortune that he put into a trust for his daughter and a charitable foundation in his mother-in-law's name. They bought a sprawling old farmhouse not far from the lake, a place with real wood floors that creaked and big windows that let in the morning light. The leather journal now sits on a bookshelf in their new living room, not as a secret testament to pain, but as an open story of survival. It's a reminder that the truth is often quiet, and that true strength isn't about never falling, but about having the courage to find your way back to the light. James and Elsie are not a fairy tale, but something more real. Two people rebuilding a life on a foundation of brutal honesty and hard-earned grace, one day at a time. This story is a tribute to the resilience of the human spirit. If you were moved by Elsie's journey to reclaim her voice and her dignity, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories of strength, justice, and second chances.